This is a story about stories, and what I've learned about the power of stories over the last 80 years. I'm Michael McKown. Well, I'm his avatar because Mike doesn't like being on camera, so I got this job. But what follows, he wrote. I'm going to tell you a few real-life stories from our writing life. I've been all about the story since I was a kid in elementary school. When the recess bell rang, everyone ran to the playground. Me and a few others, we stayed by the classroom steps and listened to the teacher read stories. Many decades later, I'm still listening to them. Who would have believed I'm still doing the same thing? Journalism was my passion. During my first semester in college, there was a student body election. I voted and realized something. A student could vote more than once and get away with it, so I wrote about it. The headline on the front page of the college newspaper asked a simple question. How many times did you vote in the election? Not long afterward, I learned that the man in charge of the election had been fired. That was one of the first times I realized something. Stories have consequences. In the late 1960s, I served as a Navy journalist aboard a World War II aircraft carrier. By then, I'd already discovered something important. Stories aren't just entertainment. They can change the way people think. On that ship, I had a chance to test that idea. Now, the military has always kept a tight lid on speech, and the ship's magazine was distributed far beyond the carrier, including the Pentagon. Somehow, I convinced the captain to loosen that lid and allow free speech. A big issue the Navy had back then, in the midst of the Vietnam War, was how to improve retention rates. I thought I understood why sailors weren't re-enlisting, and so I wrote an analysis, which included a lot of things the Navy didn't care to think about. Then we went to press, and all hell broke loose. When the magazines reached Washington, 3 admirals, 2 captains, and a commander came unglued and snarled at both me and the captain. "McKown doesn't know what he's talking about," was the refrain. Oh, really? The sailors had a different opinion. As I moved about the ship, I found paragraphs cut out from the article and taped to desks, equipment, bulkheads, and mirrors. Evidently, the Navy didn't understand its own problem. Suddenly, I was notorious. Good. I thought they might kick me out of the service, but they didn't. All right, I had over a year to go before my enlistment was up. I decided to tell sailor stories for the civilian press, real stories of real sailors at work. The Navy loves to present a glossy image to the public, which misrepresents the actual experience. I grabbed a notebook, pen, and camera, and headed to an aircraft carrier in dry dock. Men were chipping paint, lying upside down, on ratty nylon webbing, beneath the angle deck, way high above dry dock concrete. I climbed out there with them. I asked questions. I photographed the men, the frayed webbing beneath them, and the concrete far below. This wasn't really a story about individual sailors. It was a story about the work and the risk. I wrote the article, copied it, made prints of the photos, and mailed packages to newspapers across the country. Men were also way down in the bowels of the ship. They were chipping rust off steel in ballast compartments. These spaces were about 5 feet square and 3 feet high. The sailor I photographed was using a pneumatic hammer, had a work light, an eye shield, and was breathing foul air. I packaged the story in photos and again sent it out to the civilian press. Join the Navy and see the world. Well, not exactly. The responses from newspaper editors began to arrive. They said, "We've never seen anything like this before." No kidding. This was the real Navy, not the glossy version, not the recruiting poster. My goal was simple: strip away the polish and tell the truth. Apparently, the admirals in Washington never noticed just how subversive those stories really were. I hoped I informed some potential recruits. I did receive a good conduct ribbon, which I thought was ironic. I've always loved German Shepherds. In the early 1970s, a new dog activity was arriving in the United States called Schutzhund, which at the time primarily involved my favorite breed. It translates from the German as protection dog, but it's actually a sport for points, involving tracking, obedience, and protection. This is a tale about how stories popularized the working dog movement in the US. This new sport needed a governing body. We called it the United Schutzhund Clubs of America. I was a co-founder and its first business administrator. I knew that there had to be a means of communication between the parent group and members of local clubs. And so, I began developing a bi-monthly magazine. I advertised it at my own expense and money poured in for subscriptions. Then came the organizing board meeting in Dallas in 1976. I put the cash and checks in a basket and headed to Texas. I told the board the club needed a magazine, not only to communicate with the membership, but also to introduce the sport to dog lovers across America. "We can't afford a magazine," someone immediately said. I didn't answer. I grabbed the basket from a shelf and turned it upside down. Cash and checks spilled across the table. "Oh, yes, we can!" There was stunned silence. Finally, the chairman spoke. "Okay, we have a magazine." We called it Schutzhund USA. Every 2 months, it connected people who until then barely knew one another existed. It carried training articles, exciting action photos, equipment reviews, event schedules, profiles of members, and news from local clubs around the country. New clubs began forming. The sport grew. Today, when you say Schutzhund in the dog world, people don't answer, "Schutz, what?" About 3 years later, I founded a commercial working dog magazine where I served as editor and publisher for 22 years. For ages, I had been telling stories about things I was directly involved with. In 2002, I started helping other people tell theirs. A gifted young editor contacted me, and we became partners for the next 15 years. I worked with the clients and helped bring their books, wedding vows, speeches, and screenplays to life. Today, I work with a team of exceptional writers. The mission hasn't changed. We help people tell their stories. Stories matter. Stories challenge institutions and can change them. They teach lessons. They influence behavior. They provide family continuity. Stories outlive us. Most people don't write their stories in a complete and coherent manner. Why? Because it's hard. If you're old enough to write your memoir, then you're old enough to know that time matters. And every day, you have a little less. For 80 years, I've seen what stories can do. Now I have 2 questions. What's the story only you can tell? And how are you going to get it told? If you don't have the skill or time to write it yourself, then call an expert storyteller. I hope you found this video informative. Please like it, subscribe to my channel, upvote, or share. Thanks for watching.